Hello, CloudHire family. Thank you for joining us today. I have a very special guest for you, Tabitha Williams, who is the founder and CEO of Williams Exec Solutions, specializing in finding executive talent for companies across the United States. Tabitha, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here today.
Glad to have you. So as you know, I am the founder and CEO of CloudHire. We specialize in finding talent globally and plugging that talent into our clients' workflow. You do a really similar thing with exec search in America. I would love for you to kind of explain what it is that you're doing at your company and how you got into that situation, what type of background you had before you got into it, and what really inspired you to, start your own exec search firm.
Sure, happy to. So situation's a great word. I founded Williams Exec Solutions really because I was a recruiting exec working in-house, and I found myself either continually building sourcing teams to try and diversify our candidate slates or to deal with like niche searches. I used to do a lot of quant recruiting, but I founded it because I couldn't find what I needed in the market in one provider. And somewhere along the line, you either think, oh, I'm going to potentially move to another job, do something different. And when I get around to doing that, what would that look like? And it just sort of came to me. I wanted to create what I couldn't find and what I thought could be helpful to companies. In doing so, I built this executive search and consulting firm. And the way I got into this is years of working in-house, which by the way wasn't planned. I started my career in executive search, and I went in-house at that time back in the olden days, Merrill Lynch, because I wanted to learn financial services. I had worked on some projects when I was in-house, and the last one I did was this diversity mapping, investment bank front office professionals. And I realized outside of understanding debt and credit, more so related to like my checking account versus anything, I just became really curious. And in doing so, I said, you know what, the best way to learn financial services, and at that point, I wasn't even thinking broad financial services. I was thinking investment bank. The best way to learn that is go in-house and do it. And it was interesting, especially as someone who prior to that had covered consumer retail and CFOs and everything but financial services. And that, what I thought was going to be a 3-year stint and cycle back onto this side of the business turned into 16, 17 years working at Merrill, at JP Morgan, and at Amazon. So my career, I spent more time working inside companies, and a lot of that is due to being in very entrepreneurial environments. Then in some ways, I felt like I was able to do what I needed to do in order to keep myself intellectually stimulated, but also work closely with clients to build their businesses and find talent. And I had a lot of rewarding roles doing that. But at some point I decided, you know what, now's the time. Many years later than I originally planned to go back outside. But with the knowledge and the experience of managing clients and understanding how they think and how different my approach was going to become versus if I had done my 3 years and went back to executive search at that time. So my company, which I in short form refer to as WES, and I also went to Wesleyan University, so I thought it was a little funny joke because everyone who went to Wesleyan refers to it as WES, so it was easy for me to remember anyway. But we focus on kind of two main things. One is executive search, so working with clients to help them find executive talent, and with a focus always on presenting them with diverse slates of talent. And consulting. I love talent acquisition. I think there's lots of opportunity parlay my experience into clients, so working with them on talent acquisition optimization and sourcing strategies, training workshops, that kind of thing.
Amazing. The amount of experience that you have, relevant brands in the executive level probably helps you translate into, the work that you're doing right now. And it's kind of inspiring too. I really like the entrepreneurial spirit.
Most people don't think of financial services as being entrepreneurial, but every job I had from Merrill into JP involved building some sort of sourcing capability, whether I was an individual at the contributor at the time and doing it myself, or like my last role at JP was building a sourcing team to focus on what was the Black strategy for JP Morgan at the time, which was identifying more Black managing directors and executive directors to diversify the slates. So it was never, and this is why it lasted so long, by the way, it was never this sort of like plug and play, like go fill those jobs and keep it moving. There was always that challenge that kept me interested and learning, because I think that's important. We spend more time at work often, more time sometimes than we do at home.
Yeah, 100%. You need to have something that drives you every day while you're at work, something that you know you're passionate about, or you're not going to achieve the type of results you want to long-term career-wise. So it makes total sense that you've transitioned from doing something that you love for somebody else to now doing it for yourself. Or you're still doing it for other people, but at least you're your own boss now.
Yes.
That's nice. So for the audience, I wanted to just touch up on a couple of things that we were going to talk about. The first thing is referring to talent acquisition teams and companies that have them. Let's talk about how we can improve the talent acquisition process and how companies should be aiding in furthering and enriching their talent acquisition teams in order to achieve the goals that they've set forward.
Yeah, so talent acquisition, or TA, I think is one of the most critical functions in a company, mainly because you're hiring talent for the company. And I'm seeing this trend where people are kind of changing the structure in their organizations every 2 to 3 years. And in an ideal world, you're not going to change your business model every 2 to 3 years because you're trying to make progress. So as I think of TA, I think I've always thought run it like a business. You have to be focused on the results, which means you'll never hear me talk about TA or any work I'm doing based on assumptions or my feelings about what's happening in the market. Everything is always grounded in data, because you're trying to help your clients manage that business. But from a business perspective, I think too often TA is sometimes almost an afterthought. And I don't think the business necessarily thinks of it that way, but I've always found it odd that you're going into a new year and there may not be plans set, or you're setting your plans for that current year in the year and not the year prior. Yet the business knows, hey, we want to double our business from 200 million to 400 million over, the next 2 or 3 years. And when you ask the question, okay, what's the headcount aligned to that? Oh, get it from the CFO or get it from my chief of staff. And then when you go get the numbers, okay, if your headcount, you expect your headcount will increase, 50% or whatever the number is. And then you're like, okay, what are the roles that are aligned to that? Because you may not know the specific roles, but you should know things like, hey, we're going to need to increase software development capabilities, or we're going to need more finance professionals, or whatever that looks like. And when you start to drill down, there's no answers. And I found that odd. Like as a TA exec, you sometimes feel like you're planning your organization based on kind of finger in the wind and building models to try and assume, okay, do the numbers go up? Do they go down? And when the market is bad, everything falls off a cliff. And then when the market is good, all of a sudden you've got to figure out how do you increase capacity on your team, which doesn't necessarily equate to how do you increase the number of people on the team to be able to have more output. So I would encourage anyone looking at either building a new TA organization or looking at their current org to think about how do we run this closer to our business and make sure that they have a seat at the table, or whoever your head of HR has the information to represent what TA needs in order to be able to deliver. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to deliver for your clients, but really is a partnership. Like I think sometimes you might hear recruiters think that they're the sort of the superstars of this. And that's awesome if that's how you approach it. But at the end of the day, recruiters facilitate the hiring managers hire. And sometimes I think we forget that part and want to make it as easy as possible to be able to actually do the hiring and do it quickly so we can move on to the next priority.
Yeah. You mentioned briefly that you want to have a data-driven approach to TA. What are some of the aspects that you're looking at in the data to know that you're going the right direction with your clients?
Yeah, it's everything from do we have the right job alignment to the business's needs, and then from an actual TA side, what do those metrics look like? And everything as basic as how many recruiters and sourcers, depending on your TA model, do you have aligned to the volume? And are you set up to actually be able to exit your fiscal year having met your goals? And realistically speaking, I've yet to see an operation that actually exits the year and hits zero. It's sort of that ideal that everyone in TA has. And I think if you look at your model, is your model set up to actually be able to deliver that, which means really having a diagnostic approach as to kind of what that looks like versus sitting there going, well, company A does it amazing over here, so we should copy that, because what may work for company A that has 500,000 employees may not work for you if you only have 200 or 300. And then from an analytics standpoint, you're also looking at the actual kind of the sourcing streams and really understanding kind of where is your talent coming in. If you've got a big brand in the market, you may be seeing thousands, hundreds of thousands of resumes every single year because everyone knows your company. How do you manage that? And how do you determine, is that good flow? Because you could have that much volume, but the quality may not necessarily be there. So you've got to take into account, how do we determine what that looks like? And then the analytics around those slates. I think if you want to have an equitable and fair process, you always want to have as diverse a slate as possible. And how do you know you have that when you're not going to just look at someone and say, hey, I think they're that. You're looking at what is the information coming out of your ATS that's helping you understand, oh, I need to look at, maybe I do a partnership with this woman's organization or something here in order to further diversify those slates. And then as you flow through that recruiting cycle, it's what are the results? Because do you have an input problem challenge? Do you need to do more direct sourcing, which means do you need a sourcing team? Are your full life cycle recruiters capable? There are so many different analytics that you can use to better your organization. It's just a matter of, are you looking at it in a way that helps you build up the org and support TA to actually be able to deliver, versus every year there's more put on the TA organization, but we're not strategically making sure that we're keeping up with the different changes in the business.
I 100% agree with you on your approach to making sure that the team is growing at a pace that would match the growth that senior leadership is looking for. As, somebody that runs a business myself, when I'm trying to figure out where my revenue should be in a calendar year, before the year starts, the first thing that I do is look at how many more people I'm going to need in order to push that demand. How many people am I going to need in order to do the sourcing for the amount of hires that will meet that revenue target that we have? And a lot of times people are looking at chasing a certain figure, certain level of growth without fully taking inventory of how much their current team could do and how many more people they'll need in order to hit that number. They fail at it. And I think that's exactly where you provide value in the market, by identifying that gap and helping companies, make it to having enough people on their team to execute the revenue they're looking for. So it's really cool that you're working on it. It's something that I realized sometime last year that, hey, the only way to grow sustainably is to make sure that I have the right talent onboarding at the right time so I can continue to push the demand that comes in, or create the demand rather.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add is that, and this is the recruiter in me, you should always be meeting people. Even if all of a sudden the amount of jobs you need, and this will happen for hiring managers, goes to zero. Like, part of your job is to know the talent in the market and to know what your competition looks like. And that means networking with people even when you don't have a job, because it gives you a better appreciation for where you might be recruiting from or what you might need to do to better develop your own team.
Yeah. You mentioned the recruiter in you. You briefly mentioned about the data that goes through your ATS and approaching zero as your hiring manager. And in all of this, there's a segment in our audience that really wonders, hey, how can I get through that ATS? How can I impact and get to that zero number for that company and, join that company? And how can I demonstrate that I am qualified enough to pass through the ATS to get a resume, to get a job? So Tabitha, what are your suggestions for people that are trying to stand out and get that job? How do you think that a candidate can really demonstrate their aptitude and the fact that they're bringing diversity into their organization through not just their resume, but other things that you were talking about, like networking?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not easy. It isn't. And the volume, like, you're talking to someone who, I found my first job in search through monster.com. And this is probably a year or two after Monster launched. So, like,
not that easy anymore. I wish.
No, it is not. So that was like back in dinosaur days. So when you look at the volume of talent that's flowing through, I think from an individual standpoint, there are a couple things. One, keep it simple, like your resume. Sometimes I see these resumes and they look nice, and I'm like, oh, they must have created this in Canva. But at the end of the day, like, when someone is sitting there and they may not even be spending 30 seconds looking at your resume, they need to be able to look at your resume, pick up on what it is that you do and what it is that you have accomplished and can contribute. Sometimes we say, hey, we're throwing a resume together. Don't literally do that. Like, take the time to, like, put it together, have someone read it, because oftentimes people will talk about what their teams did. You will have no idea what they did. Or you can tell people are copying things from websites, but they don't really understand what it is they're putting in there. So take the time to simplify your resume. Ideally one page, especially if you're a junior. There really is no reason you should have more than one page, unless that second page is you're a banker and it's a deal sheet of some sort. So simplify the resume, make sure it's accurate, make sure it is demonstrating what you're looking for. Also look at similar jobs and see, like, does the terminology you're using match what you're seeing? Because if the recruiter or sourcer is using their ATS in the way they should be, they're looking for keywords. And the reality is, like, and I'm a recruiter, so I'll say this for myself, I've got a short attention span. If you're a volume recruiter and you have 100+ resumes, like, you're trying to figure out, how do I whittle that down into something that makes sense? So you almost have to put yourself in the mind of a recruiter, answer any questions that are in there. Don't be discouraged if you don't get through it. That just means, like, you didn't pass the qualifying stage, and you're not going to waste your time there. And if it's something that you haven't done but want to do, understand what it takes to get into that side of the market. Networking is big. LinkedIn is where everyone networks. It just is what it is. So, and oftentimes you'll see hiring managers put up posts, hey, I'm looking for this for my team. I say network with people, even when you are not looking for a job. And network with people who are doing similar things that you're doing, so that when you are looking for a job, or you are starting to think about looking for one, you can say, hey, can I have 15 minutes to pick your brain, or can we grab a coffee or something? Because the reality is, yes, there are candidates that come in through the ATS, but there are also a lot of candidates that come in as referrals into the organization. So you're networking with people that you may not know, network with people that you do know who are willing to refer you. And don't be offended if they're not. If they don't know your work, like if I don't know your work, I'm not referring you. Or I may refer you, but say I can't speak to your work. I think you have to kind of manage your search. Be mindful about what you're applying for. So if you're a CFO and you want to be a risk manager while there's you manage risk in a CFO role, like you're probably not being hired as a risk manager off the bat. So be mindful of what your skill set is versus what you're looking for, and be realistic. Because I find oftentimes, and I've done this myself, like when I was younger, I remember applying for a risk management job because I read the description and it seemed like it made sense. And the reality was, years later, when I'm managing risk recruiting, I realized I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea what I was applying for. So do the research to really apply for the things that make sense for you, but really do everything that you can to try and talk to a live human. It makes all the difference. You don't want to just be dropping resumes into jobs and you never talk to someone.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of advice that, it's a numbers game and you just got to keep pushing those resumes. I think that's really bad advice, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. It's no different than looking for an apartment or looking for a house. Like you're doing a search, and I'd add one more thing. It takes time to find a job. You can quickly find a job if you're looking for a career. I always tell someone it could take you a year to transition, because during that year, you're networking, you're trying to understand what's in the market. And frankly, if you're already at a company and there's opportunity there, look there first, because especially if you're trying to transition to something new, try and get as much experience. I think be very strategic about how you approach your career versus job hopping. Like be mindful about that. And people move jobs more than they ever have. But I think there needs to be a reason why. You need to be able to explain it. And I'm telling you this as someone who had 5 jobs in the first 5 years of working. I thought I'd never get hired anywhere else. But I also had good reasons as to why I would not recommend that, because I spent 13 years at one company because of different opportunities in the company. And even once you're in a company, you're talking with mentors and identifying who your sponsors are and identifying the opportunities, and also confirming, like, I think my career should go in this direction. What do the people I'm working with think? You're constantly doing your own 360 in order to be able to move in these companies.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You need to be able to take an inventory of where you're at, where you want to go, and create a definitive path. You don't always have to hop. There's a lot of opportunities in most big firms to develop and even create new departments in case if you identify a gap. You don't have to go work for somebody else. And I actually see a lot of value when looking at a resume and I see that they've been tenured at a certain place for a long time. It shows me loyalty. I really do want to hire that person. It's lower churn, and that's something that every recruiter faces at some point, right? Like you see revolving doors in a lot of companies. People are coming in, coming out. If that's not the sort of company that you're trying to build, if that's not the goal of your talent acquisition, to keep on, acquiring the same talent every year, then you want to look for people that you believe are reliable. And the time that they spend at a company, especially if they've moved through different departments and different roles but have stick at a company, really shows a recruiter that, hey, this person is there to stay. This person is looking for an opportunity, whatever it may be. In the long term, it makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look, I think people have good reason. If you have a good reason for moving and it makes sense, great. But I also think depending on how large your firm is, because some firms aren't, like, you may have hit wherever the max is of where you can go, and it makes sense for you to leave. But it's sort of like looking at colleges. I went to a small college and you're like, oh, there are advantages to that. When you're in a big company, one of the advantages is, like, there are many different things that you can do. You can work on different assignments. You can volunteer for things in order to build your resume and your experience. And I think sometimes we may have these moments where we get frustrated and you're just like, I'm out. And one of my heads of finance once said, the days that you don't want to be there, when they outnumber the days that you want to be there, that's when it's time to go. Before that, those are just days of frustration. Deal with it, go home, watch some TV, relax, come back, and it's a new day.
Exactly. I agree with that statement. We've touched upon this topic a couple of times. Now, you've mentioned how can I make sure that the quality of my pipeline is diverse enough for me to have a nice, impactful hire? What type of partnerships can I make in order to get a more diverse pipeline? What the heck is diversity? We never really unpacked it for our audience. So, Tabitha, by your definition, what do you think diversity is? And why do you think an organization needs it?
Yeah, look, I'm not a CDO or Chief Diversity Officer. And by the way, I've never wanted to be, but I think the role that they play working in partnership with the organization is building culture of the organization and helping to build the framework if they're starting from new of a place that is welcoming of all people, backgrounds, cultures, races, ethnicities, all of it. And that's the most simple way that I think about diversity from someone who's an expert can go into it in way more detail, but from a hiring perspective, that diverse slate that I was referring to earlier is how do I have as diverse a slate of talent that is in the market as possible? Men, women, however, whatever gender or no gender that you identify, backgrounds, everything. I think too often, sometimes you'll hear, oh, there's no diversity in the market. And I've heard that. And I'm like, who told you that? and frankly, like anytime I've ever heard that, I'm like, did you see the data? If you didn't see the data, it's sort of like, if I don't see the data, it doesn't exist. So like when I think of like, when I'm trying to understand what diversity of market looks like, and I'll divide it into two. One is your recruiting strategy. I don't think you're recruiting, like, yes, there are diversity recruiting strategies. Why? Because sometimes they're just not integrated into the overall recruiting strategy, or they're a segment of. And as you think about how do I create a holistic recruiting strategy that should include, like, what are the relevant partnerships? If you're an accounting firm, you probably are working with Alpha and NABA and other different partnerships that help feed talent into the organization. So one is partnerships. People partner also internally with their business resource groups. Just strategically, how do you help build that partnership? And that's not just from a hiring standpoint, that's from a culture standpoint as well. When you're looking at sourcing, volume recruiting, you're relying on some of those partnerships as you're advertising and trying to extend your brand to get more in. You might be doing events in different conferences and things like that. From an exec standpoint, which is where I've spent most of my time the last couple of years, yes, partnerships are they are important, but if you have the expectation that they are going to give you the ROI, that's all of a sudden going to blow your numbers out of the water, like it's just not realistic. I think it's understanding kind of where are the people that you need at that level, like where can you find them? Like, what are they doing? They're sitting on boards. They're part of certain organizations. And at the end of the day, I'm a recruiter, and focusing on creating diverse slates, whether I've been sitting in a diverse recruiting group or not, is just what I've done. But the one thing that I always go back to is if you put the entire diversity piece to the side, sourcing is all about understanding your market, understanding the people who sit in the market, and understanding all the people who sit in that market, which means like you don't just rely on one resource from a desktop research standpoint or contact standpoint to reach out to people. And more importantly, it means you actually have to talk to humans. It's not like just sending out messages and emails and hoping that somebody like expresses interest. It's talking to people, because then you start to get an appreciation of who's in the market. They can understand what you're trying to accomplish, and people can help you. So it's bringing together all the best practices of what we do as recruiters and sourcers trying to build slates, because ultimately I'm going back to my client, and my job is to give you options. And if I'm telling you there's no talent in the market, you're looking for men, if you're looking for women, if you're looking for Black or Asian or whatever, then I'm showing you what that looks like, what that market looks like today, where the talent is, and I'm trying to kind of help you. But I never take there's no diverse talent in the market, or there's no female talent, or whatever it is, without the data. Like I'm a data junkie, because the minute I hear that, then I start looking for the people. And if I can find them, they're there.
Yeah. Being a remote first company at CloudHire, we're really able to push diverse set of talent into our clients' companies because we're sourcing globally. And for us, the definition of diversity doesn't just stop at ethnicity, background, and things like that. For us, we really think about how somebody thinks and try to have diversity even in that, profiling people in terms of their psychological pattern and trying to figure out how we can create teams that are both diverse in background, but also in thought, so that we have like a truly rounded team that's getting pushed to a client to achieve, maximal results. At Wes, how do you guys make sure that you're pushing that sort of talent to your clients? And what type of services do you have for your clients so that, you can maximize their ROI?
In terms of the talent, it's a matter of interacting with people. I'm not running tests, though I have to say there are, I think, some really great diverse organizations and it's getting a lot more attention now than I think it ever has. But I think some of the value and what's expected when you're working in exec search is not just an understanding of the market and being able to deliver that, but being able to help understand kind of what's that person's experience, where are their pluses, where are their areas of development, how do they fit into the organization as best you know it. I think one example, especially when you have a partnership with someone internally, if I'm not working inside an organization, I may not pick up on all the nuances. You're going to pick up on a lot, but it's very different when you're living, breathing that culture every day and understand how the place operates. So being able to do that analysis, and I've had clients who kind of pull in external analysis for like the finalist slate of candidates. I think every organization is in a different place, and there's nothing that's wrong about that. If anything, when I first started my career search, there were a lot of like psychometrics testing and some other things. I think there's a place for that. I think it's more kind of, do they fit into our leadership matrix? Do we think that they will kind of work when we look at all of these different attributes versus like maybe they interview really well. I think one of the things that we have to do as recruiters is not just finding the people who interview really well, it's really probing to understand, like, have they delivered what they say they can do, or they have done to be able to do this role? And there are lots of people who interview really well who I've been the first to say, I don't think they could do this job. So it is being able to kind of dig into that. It takes time. It's not a 30-minute conversation. When you're working at this level, and frankly, this could happen with more junior hiring as well. You're talking to people for hours. That initial conversation might just be an hour. Then you're going into a full-on interview that could be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, depending on how deep you need to go. So you get what you pay for. And it is I think you're operating, especially when a company is kind of retaining a search firm, there's an expectation for a higher level and degree of service.
I agree with you. I think that brings us to the segue of what is it that somebody from the audience visiting your website can get in terms of value? What do you do for your clients exactly? And what do you do for people that are looking for jobs?
Yeah, so for the clients, and I'll admit my website is definitely more set up in terms of clients. They'll have an overview of services in terms of exec search, and easy way to kind of contact me so we can go into it in more detail. My background personally has been while I spent many years in financial services and most recently in tech, I've always worked across different industries. So we are generalists in terms of kind of the industries that we work on, and from a functional standpoint, anywhere from kind of corporate functions, revenue. It really depends on what someone is looking for. I often called either it's a an exec level role, or someone is looking to diversify an area in their business, but they want to do it in a fully inclusive way, or they're looking for talent intelligence. I think sometimes we forget how recruiting can play into talent planning and succession planning. So everything isn't always a search, which you see a little bit more when you're internal. And sometimes you need a higher level of data that you're not going to kind of get from a contingent operation. So they'll see that. And then from the consulting side, just an overview of our consulting and advisory services in terms of talent diagnostics. So similar to what we were talking about, sometimes it could be, hey, I need to set up a recruiting, an organization. What model should I be using? Or how do I hire more diverse talent? Or why am I not? So I think when people, sometimes when they can't figure something out, they want to dig, but they want to do it from the outside. That's when they would call us. And then last, from the client perspective, our training, our trainings and workshops. So, a lot of it related to introduction to diverse sourcing, introduction to diverse slates, and analytics, and, really trying to bring the best practices into their organization. I'm a big proponent of, developing our talent acquisition teams. If you think of it in this way, someone graduates from college, they enter a banking program or a buyer's program or whatever program they're doing. There's training. Like, they are taught how to do that job. In recruiting, you exit college, and if you're part of an HR program, fine, you go through that. But most people are not part of an HR program. Most people either started out as coordinators and then they moved over into recruiting. And when you take a step back and think about it, like, unless they were working in a search firm, they may not have ever gone through any training in terms of how to source and how to find talent. And with all of the technology that we have today, a lot of it is electronic, but at the same time, there's a bit of a mismatch. If companies want talent acquisition organizations to deliver X, you can't just make the assumption that if this person worked at this org, that org, they'll just be able to port over what they did there over here. I think we have to do more other than training on systems or peer training in order to make sure that we're operating from the same playbook. So that's client. And then from candidates are a little bit different. The one thing I can tell you, I am trying to kind of actively think, how can I do something a little bit more for candidates? Because the reality of a search business is I work for clients, and based on the orders you're looking, or the jobs that you're working on, or the engagement, then you're looking for talent. So while we interact with talent that may be incoming, I can, especially from a more junior level, and as I think about launching contingent search on our end, I think there's space in the market for more education and interaction. So when I figure that out, I'll be the first one to tell you. Because it's a little bit different. At the exec level market, you don't have people really applying for jobs. You're calling people. Some of them may not have even had a resume done for the last 20 years, or they have something they put together. It doesn't look great. So no one should sit there thinking, oh, execs have amazing resumes. I'm like, sometimes the resumes are worse than juniors. They just have more resources in order to be able to make sure what they're doing is presented in a way that makes sense for the market.
For our audience and listeners, Tabitha's links are in the bio for our video. If you're listening on Spotify, it'll be in the description for the podcast. I implore you to reach out to her on LinkedIn, whether you're looking for a solution for exec staffing or you just are looking for a job, because she does reply. She's great to network with. And definitely visit her website for more details, also in the description below. If you're interested in global remote opportunities, CloudHire is your place to be. Visit us on LinkedIn, visit us on our website, definitely apply and reach out, say hello to me. I always reply too, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. And thank you, Tabitha, so much for attending the call today. And
Thanks for having me.
I hope to have you again.